Thomas Mitchell wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched his prize stallion Thunder struggle to stand. The beautiful black horse had broken its leg 3 days ago when a rattlesnake spooked it near the creek. Now the animal lay in obvious pain, and Thomas knew what had to be done. His heart ached as he loaded his rifle, but keeping Thunder alive would only cause more suffering. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted his thoughts. A lone rider approached his small ranch house, moving slowly across the dusty Arizona territory. As the figure drew closer, Thomas could see it was a Native American woman, her long black hair braided down her back. She wore traditional Apache clothing, but something seemed different about her. She sat stiffly in the saddle, and her left arm hung at an odd angle. The woman dismounted carefully, favoring her right side. Thomas noticed the crude bandage wrapped around her shoulder, dark stains showing through the fabric. Blood had dried on her buckskin dress, and her face was pale beneath her bronze skin. Despite her obvious pain, she walked toward him with dignity and purpose. "You are Thomas Mitchell," she said in clear English, though her accent carried the musical tones of her native language. "I have heard of your troubles." Thomas lowered his rifle, surprised by her directness. "Ma'am, you look like you need medical attention more than I need visitors." She glanced at Thunder, still struggling on the ground. "Your horse is suffering. You cannot bring yourself to end his pain, but you also cannot heal him." "That's my business," Thomas replied, though not unkindly. He had lived in Apache territory long enough to know that showing disrespect could be dangerous, especially to someone who spoke English so well. This woman was clearly educated, which likely meant she held some position of importance among her people. "My name is Ayana," she said, moving closer to examine Thunder. "It means eternal blossom in my language. I am the daughter of Chief Nalnish of the Chiricahua Apache." Thomas felt his stomach drop. Everyone in the territory knew that name. Chief Nalnish was one of the most respected and feared Apache leaders, known for his strategic mind and fierce protection of his people. What was his daughter doing here, alone and injured? Ayana knelt beside Thunder, her movements careful but confident. The horse, sensing her calm energy, stopped struggling and allowed her to examine his injured leg. She ran her hands along the break, feeling the bones beneath the swollen flesh. "This can be healed," she said quietly, "but not by white man's medicine. My people know ways to mend what seems broken beyond repair." Thomas scoffed. "Lady, I appreciate your concern, but that leg is shattered. Even if it healed, Thunder would never run again." Ayana looked up at him with dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "You judge too quickly what is possible and what is not. Your people always think in terms of cutting away what is damaged rather than healing what can be saved." She stood slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at her shoulder wound. "I will make you an offer, Thomas Mitchell. I will heal your horse, and in return you will sell me your land and all your animals for $1. Thomas stared at her in disbelief. "Are you out of your mind? This ranch is worth thousands of dollars. I've got 200 acres of good grazing land, a dozen cattle, 3 horses counting Thunder, and a house I built with my own hands." "And yet you are preparing to leave," Ayana observed. "The Apache raids have frightened away your neighbors. Your cattle are thin because you dare not venture far from your house to move them to better grass. You sleep with your rifle because you know we could attack at any time. This land owns you now, not the other way around." Her words struck him like physical blows because they were absolutely true. Thomas had been considering abandoning the ranch for weeks. The isolation was getting to him, and the constant fear of Apache attacks had made normal ranching impossible. Several neighboring homesteads had already been abandoned after raids, and the territorial government seemed powerless to provide protection. "Even if I was willing to sell," Thomas said slowly, "why would you want this place? Your people have the whole territory to roam." Ayana walked to the edge of his porch and gazed out at the rolling hills dotted with mesquite and palo verde trees. "Times are changing, Thomas Mitchell. The white soldiers grow stronger each year, and they push my people onto smaller and smaller pieces of land. Soon we will need places like this, places where we can live in peace and raise our children safely." She turned back to him. "My father believes that some of us must learn to live in both worlds. I have studied in your schools and learned your language and customs. I understand your laws about owning land. If Apache people can own ranches like white people, perhaps we can survive what is coming." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. The idea was radical, almost unthinkable, but there was something about this woman that commanded respect. Despite her injury and obvious exhaustion, she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making important decisions. "You said you could heal Thunder," he said finally. "How do I know you're not just trying to trick me?" Ayanna smiled the first time her serious expression had softened. "Because I am injured myself and I will demonstrate my healing knowledge on my own wound first. Watch." She walked to her horse and retrieved a leather pouch from her saddlebags. From it, she withdrew various dried plants, roots, and what appeared to be clay. Working with practiced efficiency despite using only one good arm, she began preparing a paste. "This is a mixture of willow bark for pain, echinacea root to fight infection, and sacred clay from the mountains that draws out poison," she explained as she worked. "My grandmother taught me these ways when I was very young." Thomas watched skeptically as she removed the crude bandage from her shoulder, revealing a deep gash that should have required stitches. The wound was clearly infected, with red streaks extending from the edges. By all rights, she should have been delirious with fever. Ayanna applied the paste to her wound with steady hands, then wrapped it with clean cloth from her pack. "By tomorrow morning, you will see improvement. By the end of 1 week, there will be only a thin scar." "And if I don't believe in your medicine?" Thomas asked. "Then I will leave and you can shoot your horse as planned," she replied simply. "But if my healing works, you will know I speak the truth about all things." Thomas looked at Thunder, still lying in obvious pain, then back at the mysterious Apache woman who claimed she could save him. The rational part of his mind said this was madness, but something deeper whispered that he should trust her. $1 for everything?" he asked. $1, she confirmed. "And you'll really heal Thunder?" "I will heal him better than he was before his injury. This I promise on the sacred honor of my ancestors." Thomas extended his hand. "Then we have a deal, Ayanna, daughter of Chief Nelnish." As they shook hands, Thomas felt as though he had just stepped off a cliff into an unknown future. He had no idea that by morning, he would understand the true meaning of her last name and discover exactly how powerful her family really was. Thomas spent a restless night in his small ranch house, his mind spinning with doubts about the strange agreement he had made. Every sound outside made him reach for his rifle, wondering if he had just invited trouble into his life. The Apache woman, Ayanna, had insisted on sleeping outside near Thunder, claiming she needed to monitor the horse's condition through the night. When the first rays of dawn crept through his window, Thomas dressed quickly and stepped onto his porch. What he saw made him rub his eyes in disbelief. Ayanna was kneeling beside Thunder, and the horse was not only standing but actually nuzzling her shoulder with obvious affection. "Impossible," Thomas whispered, walking closer to examine the animal he had been prepared to put down the day before. Thunder's injured leg, which had been grotesquely swollen and bent at an unnatural angle, now appeared completely normal. The horse put his full weight on it without any sign of discomfort. When Thomas ran his hands along the leg, he could find no trace of the break that had shattered the bone just 24 hours earlier. "How?" was all he could manage to say. Ayanna stood gracefully, and Thomas noticed that she moved her left arm freely now. When she pulled back the bandage on her shoulder, he saw that the infected wound had healed to nothing more than a thin pink line, exactly as she had predicted. "My people have walked this land for 1,000 years, she said simply. "We have learned secrets that your medicine has forgotten. The spirits of the plants and stones speak to those who know how to listen." Thomas shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like this." "If word gets out about what you can do, word will not get out," Ayanna said firmly. "You will tell no one about my healing abilities. This is part of our agreement." She walked to her horse and returned with a leather document case that looked expensive and official. From it, she withdrew papers that had clearly been prepared by a lawyer, complete with legal seals and formal language. "I had these prepared in Tucson before I came here," she explained. "A bill of sale transferring ownership of your property to me for the sum of $1, and a separate contract hiring you as the ranch foreman at a salary of $100 per month, plus room and board." Thomas stared at the documents. "You planned this whole thing?" "I planned for the possibility," Ayanna corrected. "I have been watching your ranch for several weeks, learning your routines and studying your situation. I knew that Thunder's injury would force you to make a difficult decision, and I chose that moment to approach you." "So you deliberately waited for my horse to get hurt?" "No," she said, her voice growing stern. "I would never cause harm to an innocent animal. But when I saw Thunder's injury, I recognized an opportunity to help both of you while achieving my own goals. Thomas read through the contract carefully. The terms were more than fair. They were generous. As foreman, he would earn more money than he had ever made ranching on his own, and he would no longer bear the financial risks of ownership. "Why do you need me to stay?" he asked. "You obviously know more about healing than any doctor, and you speak perfect English. You could run this place yourself." Ayanna gazed out at the rolling hills that now legally belonged to her. "Because I am still an Apache woman in a white man's territory. If I try to operate this ranch alone, the other settlers will cause problems. They will claim I stole the land, or they will try to force me off it. But if you are here as my foreman, they will assume you are still the real owner and I am just your woman." The last words carried a weight that made Thomas uncomfortable. "I won't be part of any deception that puts you in danger." "The danger exists whether we acknowledge it or not," Ayanna replied. "At least this way, we can use their assumptions to protect what we are trying to build here." She handed him a silver dollar, the agreed-upon purchase price. As Thomas took the coin, he felt the strange finality of the transaction. Everything he had worked for over the past 5 years now belonged to this mysterious Apache woman. "There is something else you should know," Ayanna said, her tone becoming more serious. "My father did not send me here alone. Some of his warriors have been watching this area for days, making sure I would be safe during our negotiations." Thomas felt his blood chill. "Warriors here? They are well hidden and will not show themselves unless there is trouble," she assured him. "But you should understand that my people take the safety of chiefs' daughters very seriously." As if summoned by her words, Thomas began to notice signs he had missed before. A flash of movement in the rocks above the creek, the way certain birds had gone silent in specific areas, the feeling of being watched that had made him so restless during the night. "How many?" he asked quietly. "Enough," Ayanna said simply. "My father wanted to be certain that you would treat me with respect and honor our agreement." Thomas swallowed hard. "And if I had refused your offer? Then I would have left peacefully and you would never have seen me again," she said. "But you accepted, which shows wisdom. My father will be pleased to know that you are an honorable man." She walked over to Thunder and began examining the horse more thoroughly, running her hands along his muscles and checking his hooves. "He is actually stronger now than before the injury. The healing process I use does not merely repair damage, it improves upon what was there before." "This medicine of yours," Thomas said, "could it heal other things? Other people?" Ayanna paused in her examination of Thunder. "Why do you ask?" Thomas hesitated, then decided to trust her with something personal. "My sister's boy back in Texas, he was born with a twisted foot. The doctors say he'll never walk right. Healing children is different from healing animals," Ayanna said carefully. "It requires the child's spirit to want to be healed, and it requires the parents to believe completely in the process. Many white people's spirits resist Apache medicine because they have been taught that our ways are evil. But it's possible? Many things are possible for those who approach them with the right heart," she said. "But first we must establish trust between our peoples here. That is why this ranch is so important." Over the next few hours, Ayanna showed Thomas improvements she wanted to make to the property. She had plans for expanding the house, building better corrals, and digging additional wells. She spoke knowledgeably about cattle breeding and range management, clearly having studied modern ranching techniques. "Where did you learn all this?" Thomas asked. "I spent 3 years at a school for Indian children in New Mexico," she replied. "The government believes that if they educate us in white ways, we will abandon our own culture. Instead, I learned to use both sets of knowledge to benefit my people." As the sun reached its peak, Ayanna pointed to a dust cloud on the horizon. "Riders coming. 3 of them." Thomas shaded his eyes and recognized his neighbors, the Morrison brothers, who owned the ranch 5 miles to the east. They were hard men who had never been friendly to anyone, but they had been among the few settlers willing to stay in Apache territory. "Trouble?" Thomas asked. "Perhaps," Ayanna said. "They have probably heard rumors about a strange Indian woman visiting your ranch. In their minds, any contact between white settlers and Apache people must involve either trading with the enemy or planning attacks." The Morrison brothers rode into the yard with the aggressive confidence of men who believed they had right on their side. Jake, the eldest, dismounted and approached Thomas while keeping his hand near his gun. "Tom," Jake said, his eyes fixed on Ayanna, "we need to talk, privately. Anything you have to say can be said in front of Miss Ayanna." Thomas replied, surprised by his own protectiveness toward his new employer. Miss? Jake spat. Tom, that's an Apache. You can't trust anything she says. She's probably here to scout for raiders. Ayanna stepped forward calmly. I am here on legitimate business, Mr. Morrison. Mr. Mitchell has agreed to sell me his ranch. The three brothers laughed harshly. Indians can't own land, Jake said. It's against territorial law. Actually, it is not, Ayanna replied, producing her legal documents. I have consulted with lawyers in Tucson. There is no law preventing Native Americans from purchasing property through legal means. Jake's face reddened as he scanned the papers. This has got to be some kind of trick. Tom, you can't seriously be planning to hand over your ranch to a savage. Watch your tongue, Thomas said sharply, stepping between Jake and Ayanna. You're on my property and you'll show respect to my guests. Your property? Jake laughed bitterly. According to these papers, it's her property now, which makes you either a fool or a traitor. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Thomas could sense movement in the rocks around them, and wondered if the Apache warriors Ayanna had mentioned were preparing to intervene. He had to defuse this situation before it exploded into violence. The transaction is legal and final, Thomas said firmly. Miss Ayanna has hired me as ranch foreman, and we intend to operate this spread according to territorial law. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the authorities in Tucson. Jake looked around suspiciously, as if sensing the same hidden watchers that Thomas had noticed. This isn't over, he said finally. Mark my words, Tom. You're going to regret the day you made a deal with Apache devils. As the Morrison brothers rode away, Thomas felt the weight of the choice he had made settling on his shoulders. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and he suspected that by morning, the consequences of that choice would become much clearer. The Morrison brothers wasted no time spreading word about the strange transaction at the Mitchell ranch. By evening, Thomas could see smoke signals rising from the surrounding hills, and he knew the Apache were communicating about something important. Ayanna watched the signals with intense concentration, her face growing more serious as each message was relayed across the desert. What are they saying? Thomas asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. The Morrisons rode straight to Fort Bayard, Ayanna replied. They have told the soldiers that I am here, and they have convinced the commander that this ranch is now being used as an Apache stronghold. A patrol will arrive tomorrow to investigate. Thomas felt his stomach sink. Will your father's warriors fight them? Not unless they are attacked first, Ayanna said. But the soldiers will be expecting trouble, and frightened men with guns often create the very violence they fear. She moved to her saddlebags and began removing items that Thomas had not seen before. There were official-looking documents with government seals, letters written on expensive paper, and what appeared to be a military dispatch case. There are things about me that you do not yet know, Ayanna said, laying the documents on his kitchen table. I told you that I studied at a school in New Mexico, but I did not tell you that I graduated at the top of my class and was personally recommended by the territorial governor for a position in the Indian Bureau. Thomas picked up one of the letters, recognizing the seal of the United States government. It was addressed to Miss Ayanna Nalnish and signed by someone identified as Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Indian Affairs. You work for the government? Thomas asked in amazement. I work with the government, Ayanna corrected. There is a difference. For the past 2 years, I have been serving as a liaison between Apache tribes and federal officials, helping to negotiate peaceful solutions to conflicts. She showed him another document, this one bearing the signature of General George Crook, the famous Indian fighter who commanded the Department of Arizona. It was a letter of recommendation describing Ayanna as an invaluable asset in maintaining peace between white settlers and Apache peoples. If you have all this official support, Thomas said, why didn't you just tell the Morrison brothers who you are? Ayanna's expression darkened. Because not everyone in the government supports the idea of working with Native Americans as equals. There are many who believe the only good Indian is a dead Indian, and they see people like me as traitors to our own race. She walked to the window and gazed out at the desert, where the last smoke signals were fading in the twilight. The soldiers coming tomorrow may be under orders to arrest me, claiming that I have violated some obscure regulation or treaty provision. Or they may simply decide that I am a threat and act accordingly. Then we need to get you out of here, Thomas said immediately. No, Ayanna replied firmly. Running would only confirm their suspicions and make things worse for both of us. Instead, we will meet them openly and show them that this ranch represents exactly the kind of peaceful cooperation the government claims to want. Thomas was not convinced this was the best strategy, but he had committed himself to trusting this remarkable woman. What do you need me to do? Help me prepare for guests, she said with a slight smile. We are going to give these soldiers the most civilized reception they have ever received in Apache territory. They spent the evening transforming the simple ranch house into something that looked more like the home of prosperous merchants than frontier farmers. Ayanna produced fine china dishes from her seemingly endless collection of supplies, along with silver serving pieces and linen tablecloths that must have cost more than most settlers earned in a year. My education included lessons in white social customs, she explained as she arranged flowers in crystal vases. I learned that first impressions often determine how people will treat you, regardless of what you actually say or do. Thomas found himself fascinated by the transformation. The woman who had arrived looking like a wounded Indian was now moving through his home, with the grace and confidence of someone accustomed to entertaining important guests. Her dress, which he now realized was made from expensive fabric despite its traditional Apache style, fit her perfectly and highlighted her natural dignity. Tomorrow, you will introduce me as Miss Nalnish, your business partner, Ayanna instructed. Do not mention that I am Apache unless they ask directly. Let them draw their own conclusions about my background. But surely they'll know. They will know that I am Native American, she said. But there are many tribes and not all of them are at war with the United States. Let them wonder which people I represent and whether I might have powerful allies they should not offend. As they worked, Ayanna shared more details about her unusual life. Her father, Chief Nalnish, had been one of the first Apache leaders to recognize that the old ways of constant warfare would eventually destroy his people. Instead of fighting every encounter with white settlers, he had chosen to send his brightest children to white schools, hoping they would learn skills that could help their people survive in the changing world. I was 8 years old when I left my family, Ayanna said quietly. I cried for months, missing the mountains and the freedom of riding with the warriors. But my grandmother told me that tears were selfish when my people needed me to be strong. That must have been terrifying for a child. It was, she admitted, but it also gave me something that most Apache women never have, the ability to move between worlds. I can speak with government officials as an equal, and I can return to my people with knowledge that helps protect them. She paused in her work, looking out at the stars that were beginning to appear in the desert sky. The ranch is part of a larger plan. If Apache people can own land legally and operate businesses successfully, we can prove that we do not need to live on reservations like prisoners. Thomas was beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had become involved in. This was not just about one woman buying a ranch. It was about testing whether two very different peoples could find a way to coexist peacefully. What if the soldiers don't accept your explanations tomorrow? He asked. Then we will discover whether the United States government truly wants peace with Native Americans, or whether they only pretend to want peace while planning to eliminate us entirely. The next morning came too soon. Thomas was awakened before dawn by the sound of horses approaching at a rapid pace. He dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Ayanna already waiting on the porch, looking every inch the successful businesswoman. In a dark blue dress that would have been fashionable in any eastern city, the military patrol consisted of 12 soldiers led by a young lieutenant who looked nervous about his assignment. As they rode into the yard, Thomas could see their eyes taking in every detail, clearly expecting to find evidence of hostile activity. Lieutenant Samuel Harrison, the officer said, dismounting but keeping his hand near his sidearm. We've received reports of suspicious activity at this location. I am Thomas Mitchell, Thomas replied, stepping forward with what he hoped was the right balance of cooperation and confidence. This is my business partner, Miss Nalnish. We were just preparing breakfast. Would you and your men care to join us? Lieutenant Harrison looked surprised by the invitation. That's very kind, but we're here on official business. We need to search the premises for evidence of illegal weapons or hostile Indians. Of course, Ayanna said smoothly, producing her government documents. I assume you'll want to verify my credentials first. I'm sure you understand the importance of following proper procedures. The lieutenant examined the papers with growing confusion. Whatever he had been expecting to find, it clearly was not an Apache woman with official endorsements from high-ranking government officials. Miss Nalnish, he said slowly, these documents indicate that you work for the Indian Bureau. That's correct, she replied. I'm currently investigating ways to improve relations between Native American tribes and white settlers in this region. Mr. Mitchell's ranch represents an excellent example of the kind of cooperative partnership we hope to encourage. Thomas had to admire her skill at telling the complete truth while allowing the listener to draw conclusions that served her purposes. Technically, everything she had said was accurate, but she had made it sound as though her presence here was part of an official government mission. We were told that this ranch had been taken over by hostile Apache, Lieutenant Harrison said, clearly confused by the disconnect between his orders and what he was seeing. I'm afraid someone has given you inaccurate information, Ayanna said with perfect politeness. As you can see, this is a legitimate business operation conducted according to territorial law. The lieutenant looked around the yard, taking in the well-maintained buildings, the healthy cattle, and the obvious signs of prosperity. His men were also relaxing as they realized there was no immediate threat. Perhaps we could discuss this over breakfast, Thomas suggested. My partner makes excellent coffee and we have fresh eggs from our chickens. As they sat around the table that Ayanna had so carefully prepared, Thomas watched the soldiers gradually warm to their hostess. She spoke knowledgeably about military life, asked intelligent questions about their duties, and demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of territorial politics that impressed even the skeptical lieutenant. By the time the meal was finished, Lieutenant Harrison seemed almost embarrassed about his mission. Miss Nalnish, I apologize for the intrusion. Obviously, there's been some kind of misunderstanding. No apology necessary, she replied graciously. I'm sure you were only doing your duty. Perhaps you could carry a message back to your commander. Tell him that if he would like an official report on conditions in this area, I would be happy to provide one through proper channels. As the soldiers prepared to leave, Thomas felt as though they had passed some kind of crucial test. But he also noticed that Ayanna kept glancing at the surrounding hills, as if expecting something else to happen. What is it? He asked quietly. The hard part is just beginning, she replied. Now that the soldiers have left without arresting me, the Morrison brothers will know that I have more official protection than they expected. They will not give up easily. As if summoned by her words, they could see dust clouds on the horizon, not from the direction of the departing soldiers, but from multiple locations around the ranch. Someone was organizing a much larger response to their presence. How much larger? Thomas asked, following her gaze. Ayanna's expression was grim as she counted the approaching riders. Large enough that my father's warriors will not be able to remain hidden much longer. By noon, Thomas could count at least 30 riders converging on the ranch from different directions. The Morrison brothers had clearly spent the morning rallying every settler within 50 miles, who harbored fears about Apache raids. What started as suspicion about one Indian woman had grown into something that looked dangerously close to a lynch mob. Ayanna stood on the porch, watching the approaching riders with calm dignity. Thomas noticed she had changed into full Apache dress, buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork that must have taken months to complete. The transformation was deliberate and striking. Where the morning had seen a businesswoman in civilized clothes, the afternoon revealed a proud daughter of Chief Nalnish. Why did you change? Thomas asked, checking his rifle for the third time. Because if I am going to die today, I will die as an Apache, she replied simply. And because my father's warriors need to see that I am not ashamed of who I am. Thomas felt ice in his stomach. Your father's warriors? How many are out there? 50, Ayanna said. They have been moving into position since dawn, waiting to see how the situation develops. 50 Apache warriors against 30 angry settlers? Thomas shook his head. This is going to be a massacre. Only if the settlers choose to make it one, Ayanna replied. My people have orders not to attack unless I am threatened with immediate harm. But if these men try to hurt me, she did not need to finish the sentence. Thomas had heard enough stories about Apache warfare to know that 50 experienced warriors could wipe out twice their number of untrained civilians before the settlers knew what hit them. The first group of riders reached the yard, led by Jake Morrison and a man Thomas recognized as Samuel Hendricks, who owned the largest ranch in the valley. Hendricks was a former cavalry officer who had built his reputation fighting Indians, and his presence meant this was more than just a neighborly complaint. "Mitchell," Hendricks called out, remaining mounted to emphasize his authority. "We're here to talk sense into you before you get yourself and a lot of other people killed." "Mr. Hendricks," Thomas replied, stepping forward but keeping his rifle visible. "You're welcome to talk, but you'll do it respectfully. Miss Nalnish is a guest on my property." "Your property?" Jake Morrison spat. "We all know you signed it over to her. That makes this Apache land now, and we won't tolerate an Indian stronghold in the middle of our valley." More riders continued arriving, and Thomas could see that some were carrying ropes in addition to their guns. The mood was growing uglier by the minute, fed by fear and the kind of mob mentality that had led to violence throughout the frontier. Ayanna walked down from the porch to stand beside Thomas, her head held high despite the hostile faces surrounding them. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard, "I understand your concerns, but I assure you that I represent no threat to your families or your property." "All Apaches are a threat," Hendricks declared. "Your people have been murdering and stealing from honest settlers for years. Why should we believe you're any different?" "Because I am here in peace, conducting legal business according to territorial law," Ayanna replied. "I have harmed no one, stolen nothing, and threatened no one. What exactly do you plan to accuse me of?" A younger man Thomas did not recognize pushed his horse forward. "We don't need to accuse you of anything. This is white man's country, and we don't want your kind here. Leave now and we'll let you go unharmed." Ayanna's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice remained steady. "This is Apache country, as it has been for 1,000 years. You are the newcomers here, but I do not ask you to leave because I believe there is room for all of us if we approach each other with respect." "Respect?" Jake Morrison laughed harshly. "Like the respect your people showed the Johnson family when they burned their cabin and took their scalps?" "The Johnsons were killed by Chiricahua raiders from Mexico," Ayanna said firmly. "Not by my father's people. But I do not expect you to understand the difference between Apache tribes, any more than I expect all white people to answer for the crimes committed by some white people." Her response clearly frustrated the settlers, who had expected her to either cower in fear or provide them with an excuse to use violence. Instead, she was meeting their anger with logic and their threats with dignity. Samuel Hendricks climbed down from his horse and approached Ayanna directly. "I don't care what papers you have or what government officials you've fooled. I fought Apache for 10 years, and I know that you people can't be trusted. You're all savages, and this valley will never be safe as long as you're in it." Thomas saw Ayanna's hand move slightly, a gesture so subtle that most people would have missed it, but he had been watching the hills all morning, and he suddenly realized that Apache warriors were much closer than anyone suspected. The rocks and brush that seemed empty to untrained eyes actually concealed dozens of armed men waiting for a signal. "Mr. Hendricks," Thomas said quickly, "I think you should reconsider what you're saying. Miss Nalnish has done nothing wrong, and threatening her could have consequences none of us want to deal with." "Are you threatening us, Mitchell?" Hendricks demanded. "Because if you are, we'll deal with you the same way we deal with Indian lovers." The situation was spiraling toward violence with frightening speed. Thomas could feel the tension building like electricity in the air before a thunderstorm. The settlers were working themselves up to take action, and he suspected that Ayanna's protective warriors were preparing to respond to any threat against her. Then Ayanna did something completely unexpected. She began to sing. The song was in Apache with a melody that seemed to rise and fall like wind through canyon walls. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying across the desert with haunting beauty. The settlers fell silent, confused by this response to their threats. As Ayanna sang, Thomas began to notice movement in the surrounding landscape. What had appeared to be empty rocks and bushes now revealed themselves to be Apache warriors rising from concealment. They did not raise their weapons or make threatening gestures. They simply stood and allowed themselves to be seen. One by one, they appeared on ridges and behind boulders, emerging from hiding places that had been invisible moments before. The settlers began to realize they were completely surrounded by armed Apache, and their earlier bravado quickly turned to fear. "Sweet Jesus," one of the younger men whispered. "How many of them are there?" Samuel Hendricks was counting frantically, his military training helping him assess the tactical situation. At least 50, he said grimly. Maybe more. We're outnumbered and outpositioned. Ayana finished her song and spoke to the warriors in Apache. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to command, and Thomas realized she was not just Chief Nalnish's daughter, she was a leader in her own right. I have told my father's warriors to remain calm, she said, switching back to English. But they are very protective of their chief's daughter. If any of you harm me, they will consider it an act of war against the entire Chiricahua Apache nation. The silence that followed was deafening. The settlers were beginning to understand that they had walked into a trap, but it was a trap that offered them a way out if they were smart enough to take it. What do you want? Hendricks asked finally. I want to live in peace on land I have purchased legally, Ayana replied. I want to raise cattle and horses, contribute to the local economy, and prove that Apache people can be good neighbors. But most of all, I want to prevent the kind of bloodshed that benefits no one. She gestured toward the hidden warriors. My father could have ordered his men to attack your settlements at any time. He could have driven all of you from this valley without warning. Instead, he sent me to find a peaceful solution. By buying our land out from under us? Jake Morrison demanded. By showing you that we can coexist, Ayana corrected. Mr. Mitchell will tell you that I have honored every aspect of our agreement. I have improved his property, increased the value of his livestock, and provided him with steady employment. How exactly has my presence harmed any of you? The question hung in the air because none of them could provide a good answer. Ayana had committed no crimes, made no threats, and caused no damage. Their objection to her presence was based entirely on fear and prejudice. Thomas could see some of the younger men beginning to waver. They had expected to find a dangerous savage plotting against white settlers, but instead they found an educated woman conducting legitimate business while surrounded by enough firepower to destroy them all. There's something else you should consider, Ayana continued. Word of this confrontation will reach the territorial governor within days. He will want to know why a group of armed settlers surrounded and threatened a woman who has official endorsement from the federal government. She produced one of her government documents and held it up for all to see. My work with the Indian Bureau is documented and sanctioned. If you harm me, you will be answering to Washington, not just to local authorities. Samuel Hendricks was clearly struggling with the situation. His military experience told him that attacking a superior force in a defensive position would be suicide. But his pride as a former Indian fighter made it difficult to back down. Even if we accept that you're here legally, he said slowly, how do we know this isn't the beginning of a larger Apache occupation? How do we know you won't bring more of your people here? Because I give you my word as the daughter of Chief Nalnish, Ayana replied. This ranch will be operated by Mr. Mitchell and myself. With no more than a dozen Apache workers to help with the cattle and horses, we will trade openly with our neighbors, contribute to local churches and schools, and live according to the same laws that govern all residents of this territory. She paused, looking directly at each of the mounted men. But in return, you must treat us with the same respect you would show any other law-abiding citizens. We will not tolerate harassment, threats, or attempts to drive us away through intimidation. The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Thomas could see the settlers weighing their options, none of which looked particularly attractive. They could attack and probably be wiped out by hidden Apache warriors. They could retreat and admit defeat, or they could accept Ayana's offer of peaceful coexistence. Finally, an older man Thomas recognized as Pastor Williams from the territorial church rode forward. Miss Nalnish, he said respectfully, I've heard good things about your work with the government. If you're truly committed to peace, would you be willing to attend our community meetings and church services? It might help people get to know you as a person rather than fearing you as a stranger. Ayana smiled, the first genuine warmth she had shown all day. I would be honored, Pastor Williams. I was raised in both Christian and Apache traditions, and I believe they both teach the importance of loving one's neighbors. The pastor's intervention seemed to break the spell of hostility that had gripped the crowd. Several other men began nodding agreement, and Thomas could sense the mood shifting from confrontation toward cautious acceptance. All right, Samuel Hendricks said finally, we'll give this a try, but understand that we'll be watching. Any sign of trouble, any indication that you're working against us, and we'll be back. I would expect nothing less, Ayana replied. Vigilance is the price of safety on the frontier, but I hope that in time you will watch us as neighbors rather than as enemies. As the settlers began to disperse, Thomas noticed that the Apache warriors were also melting back into the landscape, becoming invisible once again. Within minutes, the ranch yard looked as peaceful as it had that morning, with no sign of the dramatic confrontation that had nearly ended in bloodshed. That was incredibly dangerous, Thomas said once they were alone. If Hendricks had decided to shoot first and ask questions later, then many men would have died today, Ayanna replied quietly. But they chose wisdom over violence, which gives me hope that this experiment might actually succeed. Thomas looked around at the hills where he now knew Apache warriors maintained their watch. Will your father's men stay nearby? For now, she said. Until we prove that the settlers will honor their agreement to leave us in peace. But gradually they will withdraw to patrol other areas. As the sun began to set, Thomas reflected on the extraordinary day they had survived. He had watched his new employer face down 30 armed men with nothing but courage and intelligence, turning a potential massacre into a tentative peace agreement. Ayanna, he said, I'm beginning to understand why your father chose you for this mission. But I have to ask, what happens next? She smiled mysteriously. Next, we prove that an Apache woman and a white man can build something better than either of our peoples has achieved alone. And we hope that others will follow our example. Looking out at the vast Arizona territory stretching to the horizon, Thomas realized that he had become part of something much larger than buying and selling a ranch. He was helping to write a new chapter in the long, complicated relationship between two very different worlds. 3 weeks after the tense confrontation with the settlers, life at the ranch had settled into an unusual but productive routine. True to her word, Ayanna had brought in a small crew of Apache workers who demonstrated remarkable skills in handling cattle and horses. Thomas found himself learning techniques that were completely different from traditional white ranching methods, but undeniably effective. The Apache approach to animal husbandry was based on understanding the natural behavior of livestock, rather than forcing them into artificial patterns. The cattle were healthier and calmer than any Thomas had ever worked with, and the horses responded to Apache training methods with an enthusiasm that amazed him. Your people have a gift with animals, Thomas commented as he watched one of the Apache cowboys, a young man named Koshise, gentle a previously wild Mustang. We do not see animals as property to be controlled, Ayanna explained. We see them as partners in the work we must do together. When animals trust you, they will do things for you that no amount of force could accomplish. This philosophy extended to every aspect of ranch operations. Instead of fighting against the natural environment, the Apache workers worked with it. They knew which plants provided the best grazing at different times of year, where to find water during dry spells, and how to read weather patterns weeks in advance. The results were impressive. The ranch was more profitable than it had ever been under Thomas's sole management, and word of their success was spreading throughout the territory. Several neighboring ranchers had quietly approached Thomas asking about Apache techniques for horse training and cattle management. But success brought its own challenges. The Morrison brothers remained hostile, and they were spreading rumors designed to undermine Ayanna's reputation. According to their stories, the ranch was actually a secret Apache stronghold where warriors planned raids against white settlements. People are starting to listen to them, Thomas warned Ayanna one evening as they reviewed the ranch's financial records. Jake Morrison was in town yesterday telling everyone that you're using some kind of Indian magic to control the animals. Ayanna looked up from the ledger book where she was recording their expenses in neat, precise handwriting. Magic? He says no white man could achieve what we're achieving here without supernatural help, Thomas explained. Some folks are getting spooked by how well everything is going. So we are being punished for success, Ayanna observed wryly. How very American. Despite the rumors, business continued to thrive. The ranch's cattle were bringing premium prices at market, and their horses were gaining a reputation throughout the territory for intelligence and stamina. Several army officers had inquired about purchasing mounts for their cavalry units. It was this military interest that brought Lieutenant Harrison back to the ranch, but this time he came alone, and without the hostile suspicion of his previous visit. Miss Nalnish, he said, dismounting respectfully, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I have a proposition that might interest you. Please, Lieutenant, come inside, Ayanna replied graciously. Mr. Mitchell and I were just discussing plans for expanding our horse breeding program. Over coffee and fresh-baked bread, Harrison explained his mission. The Army is having serious problems with horse procurement. Too many of the animals we're buying from regular suppliers are poorly trained and unsuitable for military service. But the horses I've seen here are exceptional. Thomas felt a surge of pride. They should be. Miss Nalnish's training methods produce animals that are calm under pressure and respond instantly to commands. That's exactly what we need, Harrison said eagerly. Would you consider a contract to provide cavalry mounts for Fort Bayard? We're prepared to pay top dollar for quality animals. Ayanna considered the offer carefully. Such a contract would be very profitable for us, Lieutenant, but it might also create political problems. Some people already suspect us of having questionable loyalties. Actually, it might solve your political problems, Harrison replied. If you're providing horses for the U.S. Army, it would be pretty difficult for anyone to claim you're working against American interests. The lieutenant had a point. A military contract would provide both financial security and a powerful response to critics who questioned Ayanna's patriotism. But it would also mean training horses specifically for use against other Apache tribes, including potential enemies of her father's people. I need time to consider this, Ayanna said finally, and I need to consult with my father about the implications. After Harrison left, Thomas and Ayanna spent the evening discussing the officer's proposal. The contract would make them wealthy, but it would also force them to take sides in the ongoing conflict between the U.S. government and various Apache groups. Your father might not approve of helping the Army, Thomas pointed out. My father is a practical man, Ayanna replied. He knows that the old ways of warfare cannot survive against the weapons and numbers the white soldiers possess. If we can find a way to make ourselves valuable to the government, we might be able to protect our people from the worst consequences of defeat. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor who would help clarify their decision. Chief Nalnish himself rode into the ranch yard, accompanied by only 2 warriors. Thomas had heard descriptions of the famous Apache leader, but seeing him in person was still impressive. The chief was a man of medium height but commanding presence, with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He carried himself with the dignity of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions, and his simple buckskin clothing could not disguise his natural authority. Father, Ayanna said, embracing him warmly. I did not expect you so soon. I came because the situation is changing rapidly, Nalnish replied in English, surprising Thomas with his fluency. The Mexican Apache have been raiding settlements south of here, and the Army is preparing a major campaign against all Apache groups. Thomas felt his blood chill. All Apache groups, including peaceful ones? The soldiers do not always distinguish between hostile and peaceful Indians, the chief said grimly. When they are angry and afraid, they tend to see all Apache as enemies. Ayanna poured coffee for her father and settled beside him at the kitchen table. What does this mean for our experiment here? It means that time is running out, Nalnish said. If we cannot prove our value to the white government very quickly, my people may be forced to choose between the reservation and the warpath. The chief's words put the Army's horse contract in a new perspective. Rather than simply being a business opportunity, it might represent their only chance to demonstrate Apache usefulness to the U.S. government before the situation deteriorated into open warfare. The lieutenant who visited yesterday wants us to provide cavalry mounts, Thomas explained. Ayanna was concerned about the political implications. Chief Nalnish considered this information carefully. The political implications work in our favor, he said finally. If Apache-trained horses help the Army defeat Mexican raiders, it proves that we are allies rather than enemies. But we would be helping them fight other Apache, Ayanna pointed out. We would be helping them fight Apache, who have chosen the path of war, her father corrected. There is a difference. The Mexican Apache raid and kill innocent people. They give all Apache a bad reputation and make peace impossible for the rest of us. Over the next few hours, Chief Nalnish toured the ranch and spoke privately with each of the Apache workers. Thomas could see that the men held their chief in enormous respect, seeking his approval for everything they had accomplished. "Your daughter has built something remarkable here," Thomas told the chief as they watched Ayanna working with a young colt in the corral. "She has always been remarkable," Nalnish replied with obvious pride. "Even as a child, she could see solutions that others missed. That is why I sent her to the white schools, despite the pain of separation. It must have been difficult, letting her go so young." "The most difficult decision I have ever made," the chief admitted. "But I knew that our survival depended on having people who could speak both languages and understand both worlds." As evening approached, Chief Nalnish gathered his daughter and Thomas for a final conversation. "I am returning to my people tomorrow, but I want you to know that you have my full support for whatever decisions you make here." "Even the army contract?" Ayanna asked. "Especially the army contract," her father replied. "We are at a crossroads where we must choose between adaptation and extinction. You are showing us a path toward adaptation that preserves our dignity while ensuring our survival." The chief stood and placed his hands on his daughter's shoulders. "But you must also be prepared for the possibility that this experiment will fail. Not all white people want peace with Apache, and not all Apache are ready to accept change. If this ranch becomes too dangerous, you must be willing to abandon it and return to our people." "I understand, Father." "Good," Nalnish said. "Then you have my blessing to proceed. Prove to the world that Apache wisdom and white determination can create something better than either could achieve alone." As Chief Nalnish rode away the next morning, Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. They were no longer just running a ranch. They were conducting an experiment that could determine the future relationship between two peoples. "Are you ready for this?" Ayanna asked, watching her father disappear into the desert. "I don't think anyone could be ready for something this important," Thomas replied honestly. "But I'm willing to try." "Then we will send word to Lieutenant Harrison," she decided. "The ranch will provide horses for the U.S. Army, and we will prove that Apache and white Americans can work together for the good of all." Looking out at the peaceful valley that had become the center of so much hope and conflict, Thomas realized that their real test was just beginning. The horse contract would bring them wealth and recognition, but it would also make them a target for everyone who opposed cooperation between the races. The morning would bring new challenges, but for tonight, they could take satisfaction in knowing they had the support of one of the most respected leaders in Apache territory. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The Army contract transformed the ranch almost overnight. Within a month, they were training 20 horses simultaneously for military service, and the constant activity attracted attention from across the territory. Military officers, government officials, and curious civilians made regular visits to observe the remarkable partnership between an Apache woman and a white rancher. The success brought unexpected challenges. The Morrison brothers, frustrated by their inability to drive Ayanna away through intimidation, had begun spreading more elaborate rumors about the ranch's true purpose. According to their latest stories, the horse training was actually a cover for teaching Apache warriors how to fight cavalry units more effectively. They're claiming that every horse we sell to the army will eventually be stolen by Apache raiders who will use our training against the soldiers. Thomas reported after a trip to town for supplies. Ayanna continued brushing the coat of a magnificent bay stallion, destined for an officer at Fort Bayard. "Let them talk," she said calmly. "Results speak louder than rumors. The army is getting the finest cavalry mounts they have ever purchased, and our success rate proves the value of our methods." Indeed, the horses trained at the ranch had earned an exceptional reputation. Unlike animals from other suppliers, theirs showed no fear of gunfire, remained calm during battle conditions, and responded instantly to their riders' commands. Several officers had written official commendations praising the quality of their mounts, but the rumors were having an effect beyond simple gossip. A territorial newspaper had picked up the Morrison brothers' claims and published an editorial questioning whether it was wise to allow hostile Indians to have such close contact with military, animals, and personnel. The editorial caught the attention of officials in Washington, and Thomas was not surprised when Lieutenant Harrison arrived with orders to conduct a thorough investigation of the ranch's operations. "I'm sorry about this," Harrison said as he reviewed his paperwork. The Army is completely satisfied with your horses, but some politician back east got worried about the newspaper stories. What exactly are you investigating? Ayanna asked. I have to verify that you're not passing military information to hostile Apache groups, Harrison replied uncomfortably. It's just a formality, but I need to interview all your workers and examine your records. Thomas felt anger rising in his chest. Lieutenant, Miss Nalnish has done nothing but help the Army. She's provided better horses than any other supplier in the territory. I know that, Harrison said quickly, but I have my orders. The investigation should only take a few days, and I'm sure it will clear up any questions about your loyalty. Ayanna handled the investigation with her usual grace and intelligence. She provided detailed records of every transaction, allowed Harrison to interview each Apache worker privately, and even invited him to observe their training methods firsthand. The lieutenant's military experience made him an excellent judge of the operation's legitimacy. After 3 days of thorough examination, he was clearly impressed by what he found. Miss Nalnish, he said on his final evening at the ranch, I want you to know that my report will strongly recommend continuing our contract with you. What you've accomplished here is remarkable. Thank you, Lieutenant, she replied. I hope this will put an end to the unfounded suspicions about our work. But Harrison's expression suggested that the problems might not be over. There's something else you should know. The investigation wasn't really about you. It was about pressure from certain political groups who oppose any cooperation with Native Americans. Thomas poured coffee for the three of them as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. What kind of political groups? Congressmen who believe the only solution to the Indian problem is complete removal or elimination, Harrison explained. They see successful partnerships like yours as obstacles to their policies. Ayanna absorbed this information without visible emotion, but Thomas could sense her disappointment. Despite all her efforts to prove that cooperation was possible, there were still powerful people determined to prevent peace between the races. What does this mean for our contract? Thomas asked. For now, nothing, Harrison replied. The Army needs your horses, and my investigation proves you're completely trustworthy. But you should be prepared for continued scrutiny. The next morning brought news that would test everyone's resolve. Cochise, the young Apache cowboy who had become one of their best horse trainers, rode in with disturbing information from his people. Mexican Apache have raided 3 ranches south of here, he reported to Ayanna in their native language. They killed 2 families and stole many cattle. The Army is preparing to retaliate against all Apache groups. Ayanna translated for Thomas, her face grave with concern. This is exactly what my father feared. The actions of hostile Apache will be blamed on all of us. Thomas felt the familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach. Will this affect the Army's attitude toward our ranch? It will affect everything, Ayanna said quietly. When soldiers are angry about attacks on civilians, they stop distinguishing between friendly and hostile Indians. Her prediction proved accurate within hours. A military patrol arrived at the ranch with orders to arrest all Apache workers for questioning about the raids. The patrol sergeant, a man Thomas did not recognize, showed none of Lieutenant Harrison's respect for their operation. You Apache are all coming with us, the sergeant announced. Command wants to know what you know about the attacks on white families. Cochise and the other Apache workers lined up quietly, showing no resistance to the soldiers' demands. Thomas could see the fear in their eyes, but also a dignity that refused to be broken by unjust treatment. Sergeant, Ayanna said, stepping forward, these men were here working with our horses when the raids occurred. I can vouch for their whereabouts. And who are you to vouch for anything? The sergeant replied rudely. You're just another Apache, and right now that makes you a suspect too. Thomas moved between the sergeant and Ayanna. She's Miss Nalnish, an official liaison with the Indian Bureau, and this is her property. You'll treat her with respect. The sergeant looked Thomas up and down with obvious contempt. I know what you are, Mitchell. You're an Indian lover who sold out his own people for Apache gold. The accusation stung because Thomas had heard it whispered in town, but he kept his temper under control. I'm a rancher working with a legitimate business partner under a government contract. Your government contracts won't help you when real Americans decide they've had enough of this Apache sympathizing. The sergeant warned as the soldiers led away. They're Apache workers. Thomas felt as though their carefully built success was crumbling around them. Without Cochise and the others, they could not maintain their horse training program. And without the program, They had no way to prove the value of Apache-white cooperation. "This is not over," Ayanna said quietly as they watched the patrol disappear. "My workers will be released when the army realizes they had nothing to do with the raids." "And if they're not released?" Thomas asked. "Then we will face that challenge when it comes," she replied with characteristic determination. But the challenge came sooner than expected. That evening, Jake Morrison arrived with a group of settlers carrying torches and ropes. "Time's up, Apache woman," Morrison called out. "Your people killed the Henderson family yesterday, and we're not waiting for the army to do something about it." Thomas grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch beside Ayanna. "The Henderson family? I hadn't heard. Happened this morning," Morrison replied grimly. "Mother, father, and 3 children. Butchered like animals and their house burned to the ground." Thomas felt sick. The Hendersons had been good people, newcomers trying to build a life in the territory. If they had been killed by Apache raiders, it would inflame anti-Indian sentiment throughout the region. "My people did not do this," Ayanna said firmly. "Chief Nalnish's warriors are more than 50 miles from here, and they have strict orders to avoid conflicts with settlers." "All Apache are your people," Morrison spat. "And all Apache are going to pay for what happened to that family." Thomas could see more torches in the distance, suggesting that Morrison had organized a much larger group than the dozen men currently in the yard. The situation was deteriorating rapidly toward the kind of violence that would destroy everything they had worked to build. "Jake," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice calm, "Miss Nalnish has been here with me all week. She couldn't have had anything to do with the Henderson killings." "Maybe not directly," Morrison replied, "but she's been sending information to the raiders. How else would they know which families to target?" The accusation was absurd, but Thomas could see that Morrison and his followers believed it completely. Fear and grief had overcome their ability to think rationally, and they were looking for someone to blame for the territory's troubles. "I will go with you willingly to answer any questions," Ayanna offered. "But violence will solve nothing and will only create more tragedy." Morrison's response was cut short by the sound of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Thomas looked up to see Chief Nalnish riding into the yard with a dozen of his warriors, their faces painted for war. The appearance of armed Apache warriors sent the settlers scrambling for their weapons, and Thomas realized that the situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. One wrong move could trigger a battle that would leave dozens dead and destroy any hope of future peace between the peoples. "Father," Ayanna called out in Apache, "these men are here in anger, but they have not harmed me." Chief Nalnish dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving the armed settlers. When he spoke, his English was clear and commanding. "I have come because Apache raiders killed a white family today," he announced. "But the raiders were not my people. They were Mexican Apache led by a war chief called Victorio, who cares nothing for peace with the Americans." Morrison raised his rifle. "All Apache look the same to us, Chief. Your daughter has been spying for your people, and now innocent families are dead because of information she provided." "You are wrong," Nalnish replied calmly. "My daughter provides no information to anyone except the American government she serves. But I understand your anger, and I am here to offer something that might satisfy your desire for justice." Thomas held his breath, wondering what the Apache chief had in mind. Whatever he was planning, it would determine whether this confrontation ended in peace or bloodshed. Chief Nalnish reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather pouch that clinked with the sound of metal. He held it up for all the settlers to see, then poured the contents onto the ground. Silver coins, jewelry, and other valuables scattered in the torchlight, clearly the personal belongings of raid victims. "These items were taken from the Henderson family by Victorio's raiders," the chief announced. "My scouts tracked the war party and recovered them after a battle that cost me 3 good warriors." Jake Morrison stared at the recovered belongings in shock. "You fought other Apache to get these back?" "I fought murderers who bring dishonor to all Apache people," Nalnish corrected. "Victorio and his followers raid for profit and revenge, not for the survival of our people. They make peace impossible for those of us who seek a different path." Thomas watched the faces of the settlers as they processed this information. The chief's willingness to fight other Apache to recover stolen property was something they had never expected, and it challenged their assumptions about tribal loyalty. "Why should we believe you?" Morrison demanded, though his voice had lost some of its earlier hostility. In response, Chief Nalnish whistled sharply. From the darkness beyond the torchlight, two more Apache warriors emerged, leading horses that carried what appeared to be bodies wrapped in blankets. "Because I brought you the men responsible for the Henderson killings," Nalnish said grimly. "Three of Victorio's raiders who will never harm another innocent family." The settlers fell silent as they realized the implications of what they were seeing. The Apache chief had not only recovered the stolen property, he had tracked down and killed the actual perpetrators of the raid. "My daughter speaks the truth when she says that not all Apache are the same," Nalnish continued. "Some of us choose the path of war and some choose the path of peace. But when warriors from our people commit crimes against innocent families, those who follow the path of peace must take responsibility for bringing them to justice." Samuel Hendricks, who had been quiet throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Chief, this is unexpected. We came here tonight expecting to find enemies, not allies. My daughter has worked very hard to show you that Apache people can be allies," Nalnish replied. "She has honored every agreement, contributed to your community's prosperity, and served your government faithfully. Yet when other Apache commit crimes, you immediately blame her. This is not just." Ayanna stepped forward to stand beside her father. "The hatred between our peoples has been growing for many years," she said. "Each side remembers only the wrongs done to them, and forgets the wrongs they have done to others. But hatred will destroy both our peoples if we do not find a way to break the cycle." Thomas could see the internal struggle on the faces of the assembled settlers. Everything they had believed about Apache loyalty and tribal solidarity was being challenged by the evidence before them. Pastor Williams, who had supported Ayanna from the beginning, moved closer to examine the recovered belongings. "These are definitely from the Henderson place," he confirmed. "I recognize Martha's jewelry and Tom's pocket watch." "Then you have your proof that my daughter tells the truth," Chief Nalnish said. "She has never betrayed your trust, and she never will. The true enemies of peace are men like Victorio, who profit from keeping our peoples at war." Jake Morrison lowered his rifle, the fight seeming to go out of him. "Chief, we made a mistake tonight. We let our anger blind us to the truth. Anger is natural when innocent people die," Nalnish replied with unexpected gentleness. "But wisdom means directing that anger toward the actual criminals, not toward those who are trying to prevent future crimes." The chief walked over to his daughter and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Ayanna has chosen a difficult path. She lives between two worlds, trusted fully by neither but working for the benefit of both. Tonight you have seen proof that her loyalty is to peace and justice, not to any particular race of people." Hendricks removed his hat respectfully. "Miss Nalnish, I owe you an apology. We came here tonight ready to commit a terrible injustice based on our fears and prejudices. No apology is necessary," Ayanna replied graciously. "You were grieving for friends who died violently. I understand why you suspected me, even though I wish you had given me a chance to prove my innocence before forming a mob." The confrontation was diffused, but Thomas knew that the underlying tensions had not been resolved. The territorial situation remained dangerous, with hostile Apache groups continuing to raid settlements, while peaceful groups like Chief Nalnish's tried to find alternatives to warfare. Over the following weeks, news of the chief's actions spread throughout the territory. The story of an Apache leader tracking down and killing raiders from his own people to protect white settlers was unprecedented, and it forced many people to reconsider their assumptions about Indian loyalty and tribal politics. The army released Cochise and the other Apache workers after determining they had no connection to the raids. Lieutenant Harrison personally apologized for their treatment and assured Ayanna that the military contract would continue. "What your father did changed a lot of minds," Harrison told her. "It's hard to argue that all Apache are hostile when their own chief is hunting down raiders to protect our families." The ranch resumed operations with renewed respect from the surrounding community. Several neighbors who had previously been suspicious began visiting regularly, asking for advice about cattle and horse management. Some even hired Apache workers for seasonal jobs, drawn by their reputation for skill and reliability. But the most significant change was in the relationship between Ayanna and Thomas themselves. Working together through crisis after crisis had created a partnership that went far beyond their original business arrangement. "You know," Thomas said one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch, "I never expected my life to take this direction when I agreed to sell you the ranch for $1. And I never expected to find a white man who would risk his life to defend Apache people, Ayanna replied. You stood with me when it would have been easier and safer to abandon me to the mob. Thomas considered her words carefully. I didn't do it because you're Apache.